They sent the infertile bride to a cowboy as a joke. She came back with a son. It was a simple assessment, or at least it looked simple to anyone else. To the people who ran the core worlds, the bureaucrats in their quiet offices, it meant she was broken, infertile. The word echoed in her mind. Infertile, it wasn't a disease. It wasn't painful in the usual sense. But in a society obsessed with genetics and legacy, it was worse than any illness. It was a sentence. People like Alara were quietly dismissed, their names filed away in databases as liabilities rather than individuals. Miss Voss, the soft voice of the station's administrator, said from the doorway. It was polite, professional, but there was no warmth in it. We have arranged a solution for your situation. Alara looked up, her brown eyes sharp despite the weariness that came from years of quiet compliance. A solution, she asked, her voice steady. She had learned to keep it steady, no matter how little control she had. Yes, the administrator said, a placement program. You are to enter into a contractual marriage with a settler on the edge of human space. He is cooperative, reliable, and well-suited to frontier life. Your assignment will last for 10 standard years. After that, you may request reassignment. Alara blinked. Placement program. The council has determined it is the most appropriate measure. Your condition is incompatible with the goals of our society here in the core worlds. This placement will allow you to contribute meaningfully without further complications. Meaningless words, she thought bitterly. They are sending me away as a joke. She understood it perfectly. The council had no idea what to do with someone like her, so they handed her off to the frontier as if it were a punchline. She closed the report and stood. There was no anger in her movements, only quiet resolve. She had spent her life conforming, obeying, and trying to find small pockets of freedom in a rigid society that measured value by numbers and genes. Perhaps, she thought, this exile could be different. The shuttle to the frontier world was small, cramped, and slow. The other passengers were technicians and couriers, all muttering quietly to themselves or staring into the void outside. Alara found a corner, letting the hum of the engines and the pale light of distant stars soothe her nerves. The frontier world was called Coyote 9, an undeveloped, almost wild planet at the far edge of human exploration. It was a place that the core worlds considered backward, dangerous, and hopelessly primitive. To the council, sending her there was the perfect joke. Here, no one will care about your infertility. Here, you will disappear. As the shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, Alara could see the vast stretches of red plains, jagged mountains, and rivers that cut through the land like silver threads. The world was harsh, beautiful, and completely untamed. Her heart, despite everything, lifted slightly. Perhaps this exile would be something else. The shuttle landed with a shudder, kicking up dust and small stones. A single figure approached, a man tall and broad, wearing worn clothing, his face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with confidence, his gait relaxed but alert. This had to be Jace Calder, the so-called cowboy assigned to be her husband. Miss Voss, his voice was rough but not unkind. Yes, she said, stepping forward. She studied him carefully. There was nothing remarkable in his appearance, just a man who had learned to survive in a world that demanded toughness and self-reliance. I'm Jace Calder, he said, extending a hand. Welcome to Coyote 9, don't worry, you'll get used to it. Alara shook his hand, noting the strength and steadiness in his grip. I hope so, she replied. They walked toward a small settlement, a cluster of low buildings, workshops, and solar arrays scattered across the plains. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and a handful of people moved about, tending livestock or repairing machinery. The settlement was modest, functional, and entirely human. This will be your home, Jace said, gesturing to a small dwelling at the edge of the main cluster. We don't have much, but we have what we need. You'll have your own quarters. There's work to do every day, and everyone pulls their weight. Alara nodded, absorbing the reality. This was nothing like the clean, controlled environments of the core worlds. There were no security droids, no automated cleaning systems, no soft, filtered lights. Here, survival depended on humans, not machines. That night, Alara sat on the small porch of her new home, staring at the twin moons hanging low over the plains. The air smelled of soil, metal, and firewood. It was raw, unfiltered, alive. And for the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar, possibility. The first few days were hard. She learned to carry water from the river, to mend fences, and to handle livestock bred for harsh climates. Every task was physical, demanding, and unrelenting. Yet with each small success, a quiet pride grew within her. In the core worlds, she had always been measured by her limitations. Here, she discovered her capabilities. Jace watched her with quiet approval. "You're tougher than I expected," he said one evening as they repaired a section of the outer fence together. Alara smiled faintly. "I've had practice surviving under worse conditions," she replied. She didn't elaborate. He didn't need to know the suffocating constraints of the core worlds. The settlement's people were curious about her at first, whispering and watching, but they didn't treat her as less than. They judged her by what she could do, not by what her genes said about her. Alara realized how rare that was. Humans, when freed from bureaucratic control, had a strange and powerful resilience. Weeks passed. The days blurred together with chores, lessons, and quiet evenings under alien stars. Alara began to feel at home, not because the frontier was safe or easy, but because it demanded honesty. She couldn't hide. She couldn't rely on status or numbers. She could only rely on herself. One afternoon, while repairing a water conduit outside the settlement, Alara caught sight of something unusual in the distance. A herd of strange, bioengineered animals grazed near a rocky outcrop, their long necks and patterned hides shimmering in the sunlight. She had never seen anything like them. "They're called grazers," Jace explained, walking up beside her. "We bred them to survive here, tough, adaptable, and fast. You'll learn their habits soon enough." Alara laughed softly. "I didn't think I'd be learning animal husbandry on a frontier world," she said. "Life has a way of teaching what you need to know," Jace replied. "You just have to pay attention." For the first time in her life, Alara felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The joke that the core worlds had made at her expense had brought her somewhere dangerous, yes, but also somewhere full of life, challenge, and freedom. That night, she recorded a private message to herself, something she never would have done back in the core worlds. "I don't know what will happen here. I don't know if I'll survive the frontier, but I will not be invisible, I will not be meaningless, and I will live." As the moons rose higher, casting pale light over the red plains, Alara realized she wasn't just surviving exile. She was beginning a life that no bureaucrat, no report, no label could ever take away. She was more than their joke. She was human, and here, that was enough to start something extraordinary. The sun rose over the plains of Coyote 9, painting the red soil in gold and shadow. Alara stepped out of her small dwelling and inhaled the crisp, metallic air. The frontier was alive in a way the core worlds could never be. Every sound, every smell, every movement demanded attention. Every day was a test of survival, and she liked it. She moved toward the settlement's main compound, where Jace Calder was already working on the outer fences. The man had become a quiet constant in her life, as reliable as the rising sun. He didn't ask for explanations, and he didn't judge. In the beginning, that simplicity had frustrated her. In the core worlds, everyone wanted a report, a test result, or a reason for your existence. Here, she had only herself and the work that needed to be done. "Morning," Jace said without looking up, his hands gripping a heavy wrench as he tightened the posts. "Morning," Alara replied, squinting against the glare. She stepped forward, picking up a spare post. Her arms were already growing stronger from hauling water and carrying feed. The work was physical, but it gave her a satisfaction she had never known. "You're getting good at this," Jace said finally, glancing at her. "Better than most settlers who have been here for years." Alara smiled faintly. "I have a lot to make up for." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. He understood in a way the council never could. By mid-morning, the settlement was alive with activity. Settlers moved with purpose, repairing solar panels, tending to livestock, and checking sensors that measured weather, radiation, and soil quality. Coyote 9 was a wild planet, but humans had learned to live with it, to bend it to their needs without destroying it. Alara worked alongside them, carrying water to the grazing fields and helping repair a damaged solar array. Her hands were blistered by the sun, her arms tired, but she felt a satisfaction that no lab report or administrative notice had ever given her. Here, value wasn't assigned by a computer or council, it was earned by action. During lunch, she sat with Jace and two other settlers, a young woman named Mara and a man called Tolan. They shared roasted tubers and protein bars, eating without ceremony. Conversation was light but real, stories of near misses with storms, animal behavior, and the challenges of building life in a harsh world. "Do you ever miss the core worlds?" Mara asked, breaking a silence. Her tone wasn't judgmental, only curious. Alara considered the question. "Sometimes," she said slowly. "I miss knowing what people expect of me, but I don't miss living as a number." Jace nodded, leaning back. "Here no one cares about what the council thinks. You learn fast or you don't survive. That's all that matters." The simplicity of it was liberating. The core worlds had taught her to measure her worth in tests, reports, and labels. The frontier taught her to measure it in action. Over the next few weeks, Alara's routine solidified. She rose before dawn to tend the livestock, repaired equipment during the day, and learned to read the planet's weather patterns in the evenings. She discovered the beauty in small victories, a fence repaired without collapse, a water pump running smoothly, a grazing herd guided safely back to the corral. One morning, she was sent with Jace to scout a new water source upriver. The journey was long and arduous. The terrain was uneven and the river was rocky, but Alara felt exhilarated by the challenge. Every step demanded concentration, every obstacle required problem-solving. "Careful there," Jace warned as she navigated a slippery slope. "The core worlds don't prepare you for this." Alara laughed. "Neither do you," she teased lightly. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She liked that about him. He didn't need words to teach lessons. Experience spoke louder than speech here. When they reached the river, they found a small natural reservoir fed by an underground spring. The water was clean, clear, and abundant. Jace tested the flow, measuring it carefully, while Alara observed the surrounding soil and plants. "Not bad," Jace said finally. "This will keep the settlement supplied for months if we manage it right." Alara felt a quiet thrill. In the core worlds, she had never discovered anything on her own. Here, she was contributing, surviving, and thriving. Every small victory was proof that she mattered, even without the council's approval. Life at the frontier also taught her to rely on instincts she had never realized she possessed. One evening, a sudden storm swept across the plains, violent winds tearing at the settlement and lightning striking dangerously close. Alara and the others scrambled to secure equipment and livestock. She moved with a speed and decisiveness she didn't know she had, helping guide the animals to safety and reinforcing the solar arrays before the storm could destroy them. When the winds finally died down, Mara looked at her in amazement. "You handled that better than anyone else," she said. Alara shook her head, still catching her breath. "I'm just paying attention," she said, but inside she felt pride. She was learning what it meant to be human, not defined by genetics but by courage, adaptability, and the will to survive. One afternoon, the settlement received an unexpected visitor. A small survey ship from a neighboring system landed on the edge of their territory. The pilot, a young man in a loose uniform, stepped out, looking nervous but curious. "You're the new arrival," he said to Alara, glancing at Jace. "I heard the core world sent someone unusual." Alara straightened, sensing the judgment in his voice. "I'm here to work," she replied simply. "That's all that matters here, isn't it?" The pilot hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I guess it is." The encounter left Alara thinking. Out there in the stars, labels and rumors carried weight only when people allowed them to. On Coyote 9, her value came from her actions, her resilience, and her willingness to learn. That was more than enough. Evenings were the most peaceful time. The twin moons rose over the horizon, casting pale light over the plains. Ilara often sat outside her home, listening to the sounds of the night, the low calls of grazing animals, the rustle of alien plants in the wind, the distant hum of machinery. She began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known. Jace sometimes joined her. They would watch the stars in silence, occasionally exchanging observations about the planet or sharing stories from their past. Words were few, but meaningful. In the quiet, Alara realized that human connection didn't require perfection. It required presence, trust, and shared experience. Weeks turned into months. Alara's body grew stronger, her mind sharper. She adapted to the unpredictable weather, learned to anticipate the behaviors of animals, and began to experiment with small modifications to their systems, improvements in water distribution, animal pens, and energy collection. Every innovation was a small victory, proof that humans could thrive in environments no computer or council model could fully predict. One evening, as the settlement gathered for a modest meal, Mara raised a toast. "To Alara," she said, smiling, "for showing us all that the frontier isn't just about survival, it's about discovering who we can really be." Alara felt warmth in her chest. The core worlds had called her infertile, useless, a liability. Here she was something entirely different, a contributor, a learner, a human capable of growth and resilience. Jace caught her eye across the table. There was no teasing, no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement. The frontier had stripped away pretense, leaving only truth. Alara had discovered something the core worlds would never understand. Humans were extraordinary when given space to adapt, survive, and flourish. That night, as she lay beneath the twin moons, Alara thought of the council, the reports, and the labels they had imposed. She no longer felt fear or bitterness. The frontier didn't care about their rules, their standards, or their jokes. It only cared about life, and life, she realized, was something humans could shape, endure, and improve upon in ways no machine or statistic could predict. Alara closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I will live, I will grow, and I will show them what humans are capable of." The winds of Coyote 9 sang around her dwelling, a song of survival, challenge, and freedom. For the first time, she felt not exiled but liberated. The joke of the core worlds had brought her to the frontier, but the frontier would give her purpose, and perhaps, one day, something even greater. Months passed on Coyote 9, and life settled into a rhythm that was both harsh and beautiful. The twin moons cast long shadows over the red plains, and the wind carried the scents of the soil, the animals, and the fires that kept the settlement alive. Alara had grown stronger, faster, and more confident with every passing day. She had learned the habits of the animals, the quirks of the terrain, and even the subtle moods of the settlers who now counted her as one of their own. She moved through the settlement with ease, carrying tools, repairing equipment, and sharing small jokes with Jace. Despite her practical focus, she found herself noticing details she had never seen before. The way the light caught the folds of a leather saddle, the quiet hum of the wind across the plains, the faint but persistent rhythm of life that pulsed through everything. Coyote 9 was raw and untamed, yet it had its own kind of order. One morning, while preparing breakfast with Mara, Alara noticed something odd in her body. A wave of nausea, unexpected and sharp, made her pause mid-motion. At first, she dismissed it as fatigue from the relentless work. But as the days went on, the sensation grew stronger, accompanied by a fatigue she had never experienced before. "Are you feeling all right?" Mara asked one morning, concern in her voice. "You look different." Ilara hesitated. She had learned to ignore subtle signals from her body in the core worlds, where medical assessments were more about data than observation. But something told her this was different. She nodded, brushing it off. "I'm fine," she said, though the doubt lingered in her mind. Jace, ever observant, noticed the change as well. "You've been slowing down," he said one evening as they repaired a fence together. "Are you hiding something from me?" Ilara gave a small, unsure smile. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I just need rest." But rest did little to alleviate the strange sensations. Finally, she decided to test herself. Using one of the few diagnostic tools Jace had salvaged from a core world shipment, she ran a simple biological scan. The results stunned her, and even more, it made her heart pound with a mixture of fear and awe. She was pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, disbelieving yet undeniable. Ilara's body, long labeled as infertile by the core worlds, had produced life in a place where no one had expected it. There were no experiments, no treatments, no genetic modifications, only the raw, untamed conditions of the frontier and the resilience of human biology. Ilara sat quietly, letting the revelation sink in. She thought of the council, of the bureaucrats who had dismissed her as useless, of the reports that had labeled her a failure. And now she held proof that humans were more than numbers, more than predictions, more than data points. The following days were a mixture of wonder and fear. Ilara confided in Mara, who reacted with astonishment and joy. This is incredible," Mara said softly. "The core worlds would never believe it." "I don't care if they believe it," Ilara said. "I care that it's real." Jace, when she finally told him, was quiet for a long moment. Then he placed his hands on her shoulders and said, "Life finds a way, Ilara. It always does. Here it thrives because we adapt. You're not broken, you're extraordinary." Ilara felt a swell of emotion she had never known. It wasn't just joy, it was validation, a recognition that humans could survive and flourish even when all predictions said otherwise. As the settlement went about its daily tasks, Ilara's condition became a private yet powerful symbol. She carried on with her chores, adapting to her changing body, moving with care but not fear. The settlers treated her no differently. Here, survival and contribution mattered more than labels, and Ilara's work had always proven her worth. She began to notice subtle changes in herself beyond the obvious. Her senses seemed sharper, the smell of water, the wind, the faint signals of animal movement all became more acute. She could predict the behavior of the grazers with a glance, sense subtle changes in the soil before machinery detected them, and anticipate weather patterns with an uncanny accuracy. It wasn't magic. It wasn't superstition. It was evolution, adaptation, and the raw power of human biology, responding to an environment the core worlds had never considered. One afternoon, as she walked along the riverbank, feeling the gentle rhythm of life within her, Ilara realized something extraordinary. Her body had adjusted not just to the environment, but to the challenge of creation itself. The frontier had forced her to live, survive, and now, to bring new life into the world. It was a proof of human resilience that no computer model, no bureaucrat, and no council could ever predict. Word of her pregnancy spread quietly through the settlement. The other settlers watched with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Here was someone the core worlds had dismissed, yet she had produced life in a place where survival was hard and resources were scarce. She became a symbol, not intentionally, but by the simple fact of her existence. Ilara found herself reflecting on the paradox of the core worlds. They had measured value in numbers, in predicted outcomes, in controlled conditions. They had forgotten that humans were not machines, that life could not always be reduced to equations. Here on the edge of space, humanity showed its true nature, adaptable, resilient, and extraordinary. As the weeks turned into months, Alara's pregnancy progressed. She adapted her daily routine, balancing chores with rest, learning to move carefully across uneven terrain and handle the physical demands of frontier life. Jace and the settlers offered support without intrusion, creating an environment where she could thrive. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the plains, Alara sat with Jace outside her dwelling. The air was cool, the sky ablaze with stars. She felt a quiet connection to the universe, a sense that life was vast, unpredictable, and powerful. "I never thought this would happen," she said softly, placing a hand on her belly. "I was supposed to be useless." "You're far from useless," Jace replied, his voice steady. "You're proof that humans can endure anything, adapt, and create life in the most unlikely places. That's something no one can take from you." Alara smiled, tears threatening to fall. The frontier had taught her many lessons, but the most important was simple. Human life, when given space to grow and survive, was unstoppable. Labels, reports, and predictions were meaningless compared to the reality of adaptation, courage, and resilience. As she watched the moons climb higher, she imagined the future. Her child would grow up strong, learning the ways of the frontier, guided by humans who understood life not as data, but as a force to be nurtured and protected. And perhaps, one day, the core worlds would learn the same lesson, not from reports or models, but from the undeniable proof of human capability. The settlement continued its rhythm of life, repairing machinery, tending animals, and preparing for the harsh seasons ahead. But now, each day carried a new sense of hope. Alara's pregnancy was a reminder that life could flourish anywhere, even at the edges of human understanding. In quiet moments, she reflected on the irony of it all. The council had sent her away as a joke, labeling her infertile, believing she would fade into obscurity on the frontier. Instead, she had found purpose, strength, and life itself. The frontier didn't care about their jokes, their labels, or their rules. It only cared about survival, adaptation, and the relentless power of life. Alara knew the core worlds would never anticipate what she had discovered, but that was their problem. Here, she was human, resilient, and alive. Here, she had become a force no prediction could contain. And deep inside, she felt a quiet certainty. The frontier had more to teach her, more challenges to test her, and more life to nurture. She would face each day with courage, knowing that humans, when freed from the constraints of bureaucracy and fear, could achieve what no one thought possible. The twin moons cast their glow over the red plains, and Alara pressed her hand to her belly once more. In that moment, she understood something profound. She had become a living proof that life, determination, and the human spirit were far more powerful than any label or prediction. The frontier had given her freedom. And in return, she had given it proof that humans were extraordinary. The twin moons of Coyote 9 had barely set when the settlement's alarm system, a simple but effective network of sensors, picked up distant engines approaching. At first, it was easy to dismiss, a transport from a nearby colony, perhaps a supply run, but the readings were too precise, too deliberate. Something was different. Alara, now well into her pregnancy, was gathering water from a river nearby when Jace came running toward her, his face tense. "Ships," he said in a low voice. "Multiple core world insignias." Alara's stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the sharp awareness of what this meant. The council had sent her away as a joke, believing she would vanish into obscurity. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity. By the time she returned to the settlement, the core world ships were already hovering at the edge of the plains, their sleek, polished hulls a stark contrast to the rough, red soil and the crude structures of the frontier settlement. The ships were large, intimidating, and far more advanced than anything the settlers possessed. "They want something," Mara whispered, gripping her apron nervously. "Do you think it's about you?" Alara nodded slowly. "I think they've finally realized I exist." She felt neither panic nor despair. The frontier had prepared her for challenge, and the life growing within her had given her a strength no core world bureaucrat could measure. Jace gathered the settlers. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying authority. "They may think they can intimidate us. They may have numbers, weapons, and technology, but this is our home. We've survived here with what we have and will defend it if we must. Everyone stay calm. Follow instructions and remember what we've built together." Alara stood beside him. The council might have sent her away to disappear, but she had not only survived, they had thrived. She now represented something far more powerful than fear, proof of humanity's adaptability and resilience. The core world ships landed in a controlled descent, raising clouds of red dust that danced across the plains. A delegation emerged, dressed in pristine uniforms, their expressions a mix of curiosity, calculation, and thinly veiled condescension. Leading them was Administrator Kelrin, a tall, precise figure whose eyes seemed to measure everything at once. "Miss Voss," Kelrin said, his voice calm but edged with authority, "we have come to retrieve you and the child you are carrying. The Council requires your presence for study and documentation." Alara stepped forward, placing a hand on her belly. "Study? You mean experimentation," she said quietly. "You labeled me infertile, you sent me away as a joke, and now you want to take my child." Kelrin's gaze hardened. "This is standard procedure. Your condition was an anomaly. Our mission is to understand these anomalies to protect the future of humanity." Alara's voice rose, steady and firm. "This isn't a laboratory experiment. This is life. My child is not a data point, and I am not a subject for your study. We live here. We survive here. This frontier does not belong to your council. It belongs to all of us who work, fight, and endure here." The core world delegation hesitated. They were accustomed to compliance, to people accepting their authority without question. The frontier had not been part of their plans. Jace moved to stand beside Alara. "They may have the ships, they may have weapons, but we have something stronger: knowledge, preparation, and determination. They don't understand this world. We do." The confrontation escalated as the core world representatives attempted to negotiate. They offered resources, technology, and promises of security. "Cooperation will be beneficial," Kelrin said smoothly. "Resistance will only complicate matters." Alara listened, her heart steady. She did not fear conflict. She had lived through storms, wild animals, and the harsh conditions of Coyote 9. The Council's threats were insignificant compared to the life she had built here and the child she carried. Mara whispered, "What do we do?" Alara turned to her, eyes bright with determination. "We show them what humans are capable of. We don't hide, we don't cower, we stand." The settlers prepared for the possibility of confrontation. Barricades were reinforced, defensive positions were mapped, and communication lines were secured. But the most powerful defense was not in weapons or strategy, it was in unity. The settlers trusted one another, and they trusted Alara. Over the following days, tense negotiations continued. The core worlds attempted to assert authority, but every move they made revealed their ignorance of the frontier. They underestimated the resilience of the settlers, the adaptability of humans, and the knowledge that comes from living in a harsh, unpredictable environment. Alara's pregnancy became the symbol of this resistance. The child was not just a new life. It was proof that the Council's predictions could be wrong, that humans could surpass any expectation when freed from constraints. News of her condition spread among the core world delegation, creating confusion and doubt. Administrator Kelrin realized that their standard procedures were inadequate. They could not simply issue orders or expect compliance. The frontier demanded respect for the humans who lived there, and the humans had something they could not control: ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the plains, Kelrin called a private meeting with Alara and Jace. "We must come to an agreement," he said. "The Council will not abandon its authority. You must submit to study and documentation." Alara met his gaze steadily. "You cannot take what you do not understand. You cannot control what you cannot survive. We live here. This child will grow here. If you wish to witness human resilience, you may stay, but you will not take us and you will not dictate how we live." Kelrin studied her, his expression unreadable. He had expected compliance, fear, or at least negotiation. Instead, he found courage and clarity that defied his assumptions. The standoff continued for days, with core world ships hovering at the edge of the settlement and settlers working tirelessly to maintain their independence. Alara and Jace coordinated every detail, ensuring the safety of the pregnant woman and the community. Each small success, securing supplies, reinforcing defenses, managing animals, demonstrated the skill and resilience that the core worlds could not predict. Finally, Kelrin called his delegation together. After long deliberation, he made an unprecedented decision. "We will not forcibly remove you," he said, "but we will remain to observe and report back to the Council." This settlement demonstrates qualities that require further study before any actions can be taken. Alara's heart lifted, though she did not celebrate. She knew this was only temporary, but it was a recognition of the frontier's truth. Humans thrived when given freedom, and no bureaucracy could contain that power. The core world delegation remained, but their roles shifted from authority to observers. They saw firsthand the ingenuity, courage, and adaptability that allowed humans to survive and flourish in harsh environments. They documented repairs to machinery, innovations in water management, and strategies for survival that defied every prediction the core worlds had made. Alara continued her pregnancy under careful watch, though she remained independent in her actions. She moved through the settlement, teaching, repairing, and guiding with quiet confidence. Her condition was no longer a secret, but it was no longer a vulnerability. It was proof of human resilience in its purest form. The settlement thrived, even with the core world ships in orbit. The presence of authority did not diminish the settlers' determination. It only highlighted their adaptability. They continued to innovate, defend, and endure. Each day became a lesson in the power of human survival, the strength of unity, and the potential of life in environments no one could predict. Alara often stood on a hill overlooking the plains, feeling the life within her and the life around her. The Council's plans, their labels, and their dismissive jokes seemed insignificant compared to the reality of the frontier. Here, humans defined their own value, measured by courage, adaptability, and determination rather than reports or predictions. The twin moons cast long shadows over the settlement, and Alara knew that the frontier had given her something no council could ever take: proof that humans, when challenged and free, were unstoppable. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "We will survive. We will thrive, and we will show them what it means to be human." For the first time, she felt the full weight and power of her own existence. The core worlds had tried to dismiss her, control her, and define her limits. But Coyote 9 had shown her, and the Council, that humans were more than labels, more than predictions, and more than statistics. Humans were extraordinary, and the frontier was proof. The winds of Coyote 9 carried a crisp chill as Alara awoke before dawn, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. The months of pregnancy had been demanding, yet they had strengthened her resolve, deepened her connection to the land, and reminded her of the remarkable resilience of the human body. She had faced storms, wild animals, and the skepticism of distant bureaucrats, but nothing had tested her as much as the life growing inside her. Jace stood outside her dwelling, silhouetted against the twin moons, his posture relaxed but alert. When Alara emerged, he smiled faintly. "Morning," he said, his voice calm, though there was a subtle tension beneath it. "Looks like today might be the day." Alara nodded. She had felt the signs all night, subtle contractions, a pressure that spoke of approaching labor. She drew in a steady breath. The frontier had taught her patience, adaptability, and courage. Today, all those lessons would matter more than ever. Inside her home, Mara and Tolan prepared the makeshift birthing area. The settlers had gathered medical supplies salvaged from core world shipments, adapted with ingenuity to the realities of frontier life. Every detail was considered: warmth, comfort, and safety. There would be no sterile laboratories, no clinical barriers, only life, guided by human skill, compassion, and determination. The first contractions were intense, but Alara faced them with a quiet focus. Jace remained close, supporting her, his presence steady and reassuring. Mara monitored the progress, noting timing and strength, while Tolan assisted wherever needed. The atmosphere was calm but purposeful, a contrast to the chaotic, sterile interventions she had experienced on the core worlds. Here, humans relied on humans. Hours passed. Alara's body moved with a rhythm she had never known before, an instinctual understanding that guided her through the process. The frontier had prepared her, hardened her, and taught her resilience. She felt the life within her responding, moving toward the world that awaited beyond her own strength. Outside, the settlers maintained vigilance. The core world observers had remained in orbit, restrained by the harsh realities of the frontier. They watched silently, witnessing firsthand the power of human adaptability and courage. No authority, no weapon, no prediction could dictate the outcomes here. Humans acted. Humans survived. Humans created life where none was expected. By midday, Alara's efforts intensified. Pain, fear, and determination mingled into a single, unshakable force. Jace guided her through each stage with calm words. Mara offered encouragement, and Tolan's hands were steady and reassuring. The frontier had shown her the importance of trust, teamwork, and human ingenuity, and now those lessons bore fruit in the most literal sense. And then, after hours of effort, a cry split the air, a small, strong, unmistakably human cry. Alara collapsed back against Jace, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. Against all predictions, against all assumptions, she had brought life into a world that had been written off by distant authorities. Mara held the infant, showing it to Alara. "Look at this," she said softly. "A new life, strong, healthy, and perfect." Alara reached out, her hands trembling, and took the child into her arms. The tiny body was warm and alive, and she felt an overwhelming surge of love, pride, and awe. The council's label of infertility, the exile, the doubt, it all seemed distant now. Here was proof that life, human ingenuity, and courage could defy any expectation. Jay stood beside her, a quiet smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "You showed them. You showed everyone." Alara looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "We did it," she corrected. "This is what humans can do when they're given space to survive, to adapt, to grow." Word of the birth spread quickly through the settlement. The settlers celebrated quietly but joyfully, recognizing that this child represented more than just life. It represented hope, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. In the harshness of the frontier, life had flourished against all odds. Even the core world observers could not ignore the truth. They recorded every moment, documenting the infant's vitality, the care provided, and the extraordinary circumstances of conception and birth. The data contradicted every prediction, every expectation, every model the council had used to justify their control. Humanity was more resilient, more adaptable, and more powerful than the numbers suggested. As days turned into weeks, Alara adjusted to her new role as a mother while continuing to contribute to the settlement. She taught Mara and the other settlers techniques she had developed for maintaining the livestock, managing water systems, and repairing equipment with limited resources. Each lesson was a reminder that human ingenuity could overcome even the harshest environments. Her child grew quickly, thriving on frontier life, exposed to the sun, wind, and soil of Coyote 9. Alara marveled at the infant's instinctive curiosity, the way tiny hands reached for the world, the way eyes reflected the twin moons above. The core worlds could study their data, make predictions, and issue reports, but they could not replicate the living proof of human resilience she now held. One evening, as the settlement gathered for a modest feast to celebrate the birth, Alara addressed the group. "We have survived storms, wild animals, and challenges that others said were impossible. Today, we celebrate life itself, not because it is easy, but because it is human, because we endure, because we adapt, and because we care for one another." The settlers nodded, their faces reflecting determination and pride. The frontier had taught them all lessons the core worlds could not understand. They had learned that human value was measured in courage, ingenuity, and the ability to thrive under any circumstance, not in reports, labels, or bureaucratic decrees. Kelrin, the core world administrator, observed silently. He had come expecting compliance, control, and order. Instead, he found life, human life, vibrant and uncontainable, flourishing in ways no model could predict. He realized that the council's assumptions had been limited, arrogant, and blind to the true capabilities of humanity. Days passed and the frontier settlement continued its rhythm. The core world ships remained in orbit, but their role had changed. They were witnesses now, observers who could not dictate, control, or contain what they had underestimated. Alara's child became a living symbol of the frontier's triumph, a reminder that humans, when given freedom and challenge, could achieve what no prediction could anticipate. Alara often stood on the hill overlooking the plains, her child cradled in her arms. The wind carried the scents of soil, animals, and firewood. She felt the pulse of life around her, the heartbeat of humanity itself. The council's labels, reports, and jokes had been meaningless here. Humans had proven themselves extraordinary through action, courage, and resilience. She thought of the future. Her child would grow learning the ways of the frontier, guided by humans who understood life not as data, but as a force to nurture and protect. The settlement would continue to thrive, showing other frontier colonies that humanity's strength was in adaptability, cooperation, and the unshakable will to survive. And perhaps one day, the core worlds would learn the same lesson, not through reports, models, or decrees, but through undeniable proof. Humans, when challenged and free, were unstoppable. Alara pressed her child close, feeling the warmth, the life, and the potential contained within the small, perfect form. She whispered, "You are proof, proof that humans endure, proof that life will find a way, proof that the frontier is ours and ours to shape." The twin moons rose higher over the red plains, casting their light across the settlement, the grazing animals, and the humans who had made this harsh, beautiful world their home. The frontier was alive, vibrant, and thriving. And in the center of it all, Alara and her child stood as a testament to the extraordinary resilience, ingenuity, and courage of humanity. In the quiet moments, she reflected on how far she had come, from exile and derision to purpose, strength, and life itself. The council's joke had transformed into a story of triumph. The frontier had not only given her freedom, but had revealed the true potential of humans, adaptable, indomitable, and endlessly extraordinary. And as she watched the horizon, Alara knew that the legacy of this birth would ripple across the stars. Humanity had shown its strength, not through technology, authority, or control, but through survival, ingenuity, and the power to create life against all odds. The wind whispered through the plains of Coyote 9, carrying with it the message of the frontier. Humans were extraordinary, and the universe had only begun to see what they could achieve. Elara held her child close, feeling the warmth, the heartbeat, and the promise of the future. Life had proven stronger than labels, more resilient than authority, and infinitely more remarkable than any prediction. The frontier had won, humanity had triumphed, and a new chapter of life and possibility had begun. And somewhere beyond the stars, the core worlds began to realize that the joke they had made, the exile, the label of infertility, had created something far greater than they could have imagined.